Awesome. Yeah.
Welcome to the Sleep Experience podcast, where we take a deep dive into the latest sleep hacks, gadgets, and strategies to skyrocket your productivity to new heights. Being a high performer is all about resting at 100%, so you can execute at 100%.
Side effects of medication, they weren't doing anything for me. So I felt like my back was up against the wall.
Hey, this is Riley, host of the Sleep Experience podcast. At the Sleep Experience podcast, we interview health experts and teach our community how upgrading their sleep is the one thing that they need to unlock their biological code and maximize their performance in an effortless way by doing more with less. Do you want to become a productivity machine, have genius ideas automatically pop into your mind, stop feeling so stressed, build better relationships, and generate more income? Optimizing your deep sleep can do just that. Visit www.thesleepconsultant.com to learn more. My guest today is Mark Effinger, also known as Mr. Noots. From building a radio at 5 years old to building a helium neon laser from scratch before he turned 10, science, chemistry, and physics have always been a passion for Mr. Noots. He dove deep into brain-enhancing supplements and has created the most effective brain and mood-enhancing formulas ever created. He is now the Chief Product Officer for Nootopia and devoted to optimizing brains and minds around the world. Mr. Noots, welcome to the show.
Riley, so glad to be here, man. Thank you so much.
Yeah, it's really an honor to have you and to really dive into the brain, everything supplements, kind of geeking out a bit on some of this more advanced stuff beyond the typical, health and sleep hygiene lists. I'm really excited to dive into it. But the first question I always like to ask my guests was their origin story. But I guess for you, you've been in this space for so long. With Nootopia, what sort of inspired the idea?
It was actually interesting. So I had the start of this was my wife dying of an oxycodone overdose, and me wanting to help people not have to go through what I just went through on that. That was in 2008, and we had all of our kids were born at home. Well, all natural births.
Yeah.
So we were like a pretty granola-y family. Mm-hmm. To a certain extent, as you consider. I'm from the Northwest, so
nice.
Birkenstocks and socks and granola was kind of the look and feel.
Yeah.
But I also had a family member who had been an addict for decades, a heroin addict for decades, and then methadone following that, and then had just touched a number of people I'd known had addiction issues. People that should be superstars ended up being train wrecks. And so I think we've all had those experiences.
Definitely.
So so that led me down. I had explored nootropics back in the early 90s with a biochemist out of University of Portland, University of Oregon.
Early days.
Yeah, man. Exactly. Yeah. And it was great. He was a really good coach. He had a little tiny nutrition store in Oregon City, Oregon, which was a little town at that time, about 25,000, about the same size as the town I'm in right now. And he taught me so much about what cognitive performance nutrition could be and mean. Mm-hmm. That combined with, I had a mentor who was a ND-MD, so he was kind of the best of both worlds. Mm. And he hailed from the Orthomolecular Society, really brilliant guy. Dr. Kelvin Lindgren was his name. And Dr. Kelly was the one that kind of cleaned up my own health. I was hypothyroid and hypoglycemic.
Yeah.
And if you've ever dealt with any of those conditions, they are absolutely devastating.
Absolutely.
So once recovering from that, so now I'm going, okay, if you can go from feeling as crappy as I did when I was hypothyroid and hypoglycemic to 6 months later being an absolute rock star. I mean, performing really well, and I was I've always been an entrepreneur, always been building startups, and it reminds me of Steve Martin in The Jerk when he discovers that he has rhythm.
Yeah.
If this is out there, what else is out there?
All it takes is 6 months. That's amazing.
It was great. Yeah. The hypothyroid, we cleared up originally with Armour Thyroid back when Armour Thyroid was good. Yeah. And then we got desiccated thyroid products. I still take desiccated thyroid products as well. But that was kind of the catalyst. And then when we had our last child in 2008 or in 1998, The midwife gave my wife 4 oxycodone. She fell in love with it. I became her muse. A decade later, she committed suicide on it. So I grabbed the 3 kids. My best friend, David McGinnis, I said, come on up here. I need your help building another business. Get out of town and get away from all the things that remind you of where you've spent the last, 15, 20 years. And so rebuilt it. And then I just went on a track of why are addicts? What keeps them from making a move towards non-addictive practices? And, and what are those issues? So I went to
Welcome to the Sleep Experience podcast, where we take a deep dive into the latest sleep hacks, gadgets, and strategies to skyrocket your productivity to new heights. Being a high performer is all about resting at 100%, so you can execute at 100%.
Aspects of medication, they weren't doing anything for me. So I felt like my back
it's
was
expensive. It's embarrassing.
Yeah.
It takes a long time, 6, 12, 24, however many weeks it's going to take for recovery.
Yeah.
They're going to be addicted to something when they get out, typically one of the prescription meds that they use in the rehab center. And there was a cocktail of up to 26 or 27 different meds that these people would go through in the process of detoxification, alignment, and then outpatient.
Yeah.
And one of the things that they often told me was, say, this is not the first, it's not my first time I've been through this rodeo. And they'd say, and every time my prescription runs out, or, I forget because, I don't have the energy to really keep up after I'm off my meds or after my drugs, is they say, well, I'm just going to go back to my dealer anyhow. If Walgreens is closed, my dealer's is a speed dial away.
Yeah.
So
Crazy.
That's kind of how that started. And so I just wanted to figure out a way to solve that issue.
Yeah.
And that led to nootropics, which are a great solution for that. They seem to be the one that I could play with the most, right?
Yeah. Wow. That is a fascinating origin story. I think that's probably the best one yet on this podcast. So thank you for sharing that. I thought you were going to go along the lines like, compared to all the other supplements out there, we were just looking for something that was just, going deeper on that. But wow, that truly blew me away. So no, I really appreciate that. So fast forward to today, it seems like what you guys are doing and the ingredients that are in each of your stacks, Nootopia, I'm pretty well versed in this. I haven't been in the early 90s, like that's pretty close to when I was born. But I fast forward until today, I've probably been in about 10 years or so. But no, just everything that's inside of the ingredients, it really blows my mind. So I cannot wait to try some of those specific stacks that you guys have. But kind of like for people that are listening, maybe they don't know a lot about nootropics, brain nutrients, and things like that. Kind of just maybe high level of the brain biology. What are the most important chemicals to feel limitless? Like, I guess everybody wants to feel like Bradley Cooper in the NZT pill or something like that. Right. But what are the main kind of brain chemicals associated with sort of this feeling of hot peak productivity, peak performance, and that kind of thing?
Well, the one that, if we were to go point to favorite scientists, which we will, I think Andrew Huberman, the Hubes, as I like to call him around the shop here. He talks a lot about dopamine, the reward and that whole cycle. So dopamine is most certainly one of the key ones. And for people that have been diagnosed with ADHD and maybe on Ritalin or Adderall or a similar drug, they'll know that when you start firing a lot of dopamine into the across the neuron gap, you start to get a pretty damn focused brain. Yeah. The challenge with that can be multifold. One is methylphenidate and associated chemicals, which is what they use in Ritalin and those high dopaminergic solutions. The biggest challenge, and this is something to always watch for whenever you're taking something that you're trying to get a certain state of a certain operating state is what we like to call them. You're trying to accomplish a certain operating state, like let's say focus. Yeah. You want to be hyper focused. You are going to be modulating certain neurochemicals. You're going to have dopamine, you're going to have serotonin, you're going to have noradrenaline. You might have a little bit of GABA. In fact, we find that actually throwing a GABAergic into the mix is going to give you a better response and a more malleable outcome instead of just being that we call, excuse my language, but we often call, at least for me, when I did Adderall, I would do it about twice a month when I was younger.
Yeah.
And my employees would come in and say, and I would bite their head off when they would come in. They'd say, "Oh, you're on that asshole drug." When you're done with that, when you're done writing that paper or doing that research or whatever you're doing, let us know, and when you've run off that, so that we can talk. And because that hyper focus also gets rid of your ability to actually have emotional connection with people.
Right. Huge.
So yeah, it is. And it's part of the state change thing is you're not playing with just a neurochemical. You're not just playing with GABA, which is like the chill neurochemical, serotonin, which is mood, right? Dopamine, which is focus and reward and drive, noradrenaline, which is energy and, and push through. And the challenge is a lot of solutions, especially if you're doing a pharmaceutical solution, in order for them to spend the, $500 million to $1 billion it takes to be able to patent and do all the studies necessary to declare it safe. They've got to go capitalize on it, and they've got to focus on typically one neurochemical.
Right.
So, and that because they get a very specific result, it's predictable. They can dose it correctly, those kinds of things. So, in order to do that, you're putting your neurochemicals out of balance. And when you do that, you cause a host of conditions. One is the primary neurochemical, in this case, let's say dopamine for focus. You may be throttling that so hard that you're actually signaling to the brain, because you're artificially prompting the dopamine response. You're signaling to the brain, hey, I've got as much dopamine as I can handle. Don't make any more. So the moment that dopamine response dies down because the drug is wearing off, it's going, its half-life has run its cycle, you suddenly feel unmotivated. You can't get up off the couch. You're lethargic. All of those characteristics. You might be depressed as well, because dopamine is very critical for mood.
Right.
And so you might be depressed, and all of those factors, because you're down regulating both dopamine receptors and dopamine production. And so from an overproduction of dopamine in that. One of the things you want to create is reproducibility in the result, the end game. And you want to do it by doing two things: provide the body with the precursors to the critical neurochemicals it takes to achieve the state you want, whether it's focus, drive, love, connection, chill, motivation, whatever it is. You want to create a concert of those. You want to have a bunch of different instruments playing. You want the bass over here. You want the drums, you want the guitar, you want the rhythm, you want the lead vocals. You want to do them right. It's going to make a nice band out of it, not just a single guy going off. As Matt Gallant, my business partner and the CEO of the company says, he says, "Hey man, you don't want to be Yngwie Malmsteen, who is a incredible guitarist, right? He's a total soloist, but he's got no room for the rest of the band."
I'm loving these analogies. That's perfect. It just makes so much sense to understand. But I think that's so important. Like, you can't just do one thing, because it's like a Jenga puzzle. You pull the puzzle piece out here, but now the tower leans a little bit more this way until the whole thing comes tumbling down. So it's it's so important to have that balance. And it makes me wonder, a lot of people think like, oh, I'll just follow a healthy lifestyle, follow a healthy diet. But for somebody who wants to achieve peak performance, why isn't that enough? Like, what would be the argument for nootropics and these brain nutrients if you really want to hit that like 10 out of 10 optimized state?
I love that, Riley. This is why we wrote a book called Sick to Superhuman. And it's a guidebook on how to optimize your neurology and physiology to achieve peak performance states. There's a couple of things. One is let's take my prior condition. I was a multi-source athlete. I would do, I was a hardcore bicyclist. I was a runner. I was one of the early co-founders of a product called Trike. It's a 3-wheeled scooter. You stand on the back wheels and you zoom down the beach with it. That was in Newport Beach, California. And I did free climbing, motorcycle road racing. I was very active into high performance sports.
Nice.
But even with all of that, there were certain just inherent biological conditions as well as some of the stupid things I had done when I was younger.
Mm.
When I was in the military, I was a white rat for a drug called Accutane.
Mm.
And so in the 80s, early 80s and mid 80s, so I took this drug that got rid of my cystic acne, but also gave me precancerous conditions.
Wow.
They weakened my thyroid. It weakened my liver.
Yeah.
It completely destroyed my bowel flora, my gut flora.
Yeah.
Right. And you know what that's about. So I'm not going to say to no fault of my own. I did my own damage. I ate junk food. I did, especially in the 80s. I didn't know, when I was bodybuilding, I didn't know what to eat. So we would go to Skipper's Fish and Chips every Sunday, me and the guy that I trained with, and we would have like 20, 25, 27 pieces of fish, I think is what we're just downing it, thinking that's going to be our protein for the week. And so part of it is people only know the best state they've ever been in. They only know the greatest state they've ever achieved. And a lot of people haven't pushed themselves to that limit.
Yeah.
Athletes, whether amateur or professional, they have an idea of what that can be.
Yeah.
When I've interviewed thousands of CEOs over my lifetime now, I'm 61.
Yeah.
And one of the things that I found was that the top 0.1% of CEOs and executives, C-level executives, entrepreneurs, especially like startup entrepreneurs, and they had very unique neurology and physiology where they could work 20-hour days successively and not die. They've got their ability to rebuild themselves as well. They know how to manage energy. Yeah. There's a guy named there's a thing called the Energy Project that is a really, really valuable insight on how to manage energy. And Jim Lohr was a guy that kind of came up with the concept as he was coaching professional junior tennis stars. And one of the things he noticed is that between points, they brought their heart rate down. They walked back to the baseline to receive serve or to serve. And it was almost like that was the only point in the whole game, was that point at that moment, very present. And by bringing your state down to this is the only point that counts, this is the only one I'm playing. You have kind of an unlimited well of energy. Yeah. And so you're able to go into those things. Well, you talk about sleep. That's the same thing when you optimize these different states that you're trying to operate at. Again, whether it's focus or it's physicality, like you want to lift better, or you want to be more progressive in your sport. Yeah. You want to have a creative engagement with somebody. You want to actually be able to explore the edges of your thinking and the creative lateral thinking process of that's not it's actually not focused. Yeah. And at the same time, you get into kind of Stephen Kotler flow state, and you're able to kind of pick these pieces out that are floating around. You see it in the movie Limitless very much when Bradley Cooper he's finally cleaned up his apartment and he sits down and the words are falling from the sky as he's composing his book. Yeah. That only happens when you achieve optimum state. And most of us believe, there are so many people that I've met now over the last decade and a half that I've been doing this, that they think that they believe that they know what their optimum state is, their optimum operating state, or their optimum, whether it's focus or whatever, or connection. And then they start optimizing their neurochemicals using nootropics and these ingredients, and sleep and exercise and food, the diet and other characteristics, and breathing. Yeah. And they suddenly find that they're up 10 or 20 or 30%, or maybe 50% higher. Their new baseline is higher than they've ever felt before. Huge. Some of them sneak up on that. Yeah. It's the frog boiling. Some of them, they've never had that. They suddenly reach this optimum state very quickly, which that happened for me. And suddenly you're going, holy crap, I'm looking at the world through a new lens of being able to see. Like, I remember when I first got healthy back in the 90s, walking into a divisive room. There was a bunch of people that were fighting, venture capitalists on one side, some technologists on one side, and some movie theater owners on another. And I could actually kind of almost read their minds because I was so clear. Wow. I was so healthy. My body and mind weren't in overhead. I didn't have this overhead of trying to trying to work to try to be awake, or try to work to try to be clear, or try to work to try to think, is all of that was effortless. So you kind of move from this very very clinical forebrain, my forebrain thinking, to suddenly this intuitive, I know what has to be done. I know how to solve this problem. You don't even have to work at it. The pieces come together much more fluidly and elegantly.
Yeah, that's amazing. And like you said, people are they're so used to their old normal that once they experience what that new normal is, they look back to like, wow, I wish I did that sooner. Like if you were just coping at a 4 out of 10, you were drinking coffees, just trying to get on with your day, because like that's the only stimulant, because you're sleep deprived, and that's how you just get back up to zero. But then you access this new reality where at first it's a little bit difficult, but you ingrain that habit after 90 days, let's say. And then you look back, you're like, wow, I'm like version 2.0, because focus is like 9 out of 10, energy is like 10 out of 10, and all these different attributes. And you think of like all these characteristics, you rate out of 10, maybe 4 out of 100, it was like 40, but now it's in the 90s. Like that transforms the person that you are, and that manifests to better money, more money in your business, better productivity. Like you're saying, like working 20 hours in today's competitive environment, that's a given if you really want to succeed, become competitive and be on top. So yeah, but just become a better family member, better spouse. It just goes on and on. So it's
do you have family? Do you have wife, kids, dog, any of that?
Single at the moment. I do have a dog, but that is it. I'm originally from Vancouver, so not too far from you, up in Canada, in the Northwest. But yeah, it's like, I love Vancouver. It's incredible.
So I lived in Blaine. Cool. Blaine.
Yeah.
And so you had to get through there, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And when so I lived in Vancouver, Washington, across from Portland. My sister lives in Gabriola Island, so
nice.
You might know that area up there. And so it was a blast, and I loved the Northwest. Where are you now? Are you in BC now?
Yeah, I'm in BC now, in Vancouver at the moment. Have you been up to Vancouver that much?
Oh yeah, plenty, tons.
I'm sure.
I got to play with the junior national tennis team up there one summer. Cool. It was great. Yeah.
Yeah, Vancouver is beautiful in the summertime. It's become, it's a little bit different now with the places are expensive there, but I mean, you have the ocean, you have, hiking, you have the forest, you have the beach, you have the cityscape if you want. Like I've heard actually it's kind of an inside joke among directors. They love Vancouver because you can shoot in like any kind of scenery, which is kind of nice, but I'm sure there's a lot of places like that, but beyond just a beach, let's say. So I thought that was kind of cool. But yeah, it's I find the West Coast, whether it's float tanks or some of these other, health related topics, it always seems to start out in the West Coast, whether it's like Vancouver, Seattle, California, and then it slowly makes its way back out east. Because I remember when float tanks first opened up in Vancouver, they've been there for years. And I remember being in Ottawa, Toronto, Montreal, there would not be like one until finally it caught wind. But I find a lot of these things start out there. So it's a good place to be. But yeah, everyone there has pretty good, health overall compared to some other places. But, the resort is just there, but it depends ultimately where you are. But yeah, what you're doing, I think, is truly incredible for a lot of these different methodologies, be able to provide that for people. And I'm sure people who are feeling that, like that 4 or 5 out of 10, and then they'll try one of your stacks, and do you find like their brain just switches on, just like that NTT pill, and they start seeing things better? Yeah.
It's so great you say that. If any of your listeners haven't seen it, I highly recommend going to see the movie Limitless. Just grab it. It's a download. And there's a scene where Bradley Cooper takes what they call the clear pill, or NZT48, for the first time, and he's walking up the stairwell of his apartment complex, and the pill hits about halfway up the stairwell, and suddenly the lights are brighter, his eyes are bluer. The wheel of the bicycle you can hear it clicking as the wheel of the bicycle's clicking, that his landlord's girlfriend or wife is listening to. He gets a glimpse of the book that's in her book bag from college she's going to, on a very obscure legal topic. And Bradley remembers that from his youth, and he's able to recall exactly what that was about, and he's able to expound on it, and and he, of course, he gets the girl, and Bradley Cooper. What do you want, man? It was so funny. It was so funny, Riley, is that when it took 3,000 prototypes to arrive at the first product that became what is now Nootopia.
Wow.
And So Nectar X, which is one of our drinks, Nectar X is a powder drink mix that we make, and it's customized to our clients. Every one of our products is customized and personalized. But
fantastic.
But when we finally hit that one molecular change that I did that got it to the point where it had that effect, I didn't know about the movie. But I had a little over 1,000 people on my beta list. And so I had sent a number of them this final version. They go, oh my God, this is great. This is just like the thing in that movie. And so I said, well, what is the movie? And he goes, it's called Limitless. And I said, well, so what do I call this thing? And one of my good former business partners, Wyatt Starnes, he says, they haven't trademarked the name NZT. So I bought NZT48.com, the NZT48.com, the clearpill.com. I bought all these domains, and Bradley Cooper, I probably owe a whole bunch of royalties because for about 5 years, I free rode on his movie opening up in different countries as people would see it and they would look us up and then they would try the product and they become customers. And but we get that response. I get that response daily. Thank God for texting on phones, right?
Yeah.
They text me and say, thank you so much for opening my eyes or helping me see again, or helping me get out of this, this condition, this funk. Because when you wake up the brain, you also wake up hope. You wake up opportunity. You wake up the, ability. You also get more shit done. You do more important work. You don't have, I find that people that are, we have this scale called sick to superhuman, and it's a 5-slot scale. It's sick, suboptimal, optimal, super optimal, and superhuman. And each one of those states is an increase in your performance. And what we find is that if you're in any level of sick, like when I was hypothyroid, my business partners didn't know anything was wrong because I would just muscle through. But the moment I was out of the meeting, or the moment I was on the road, I was just drained and I was just trying to recover. And so that overhead that's presented to you when you're not at that high performance level means that you can't serve other people. You can't do greater works. You can't do more meaningful work because you're just trying to survive. And so that's what I think is really, here's an interesting, so I was in business for over a decade with the founder of Century 21 Real Estate. That's him, Marsh Fisher. And we had a product called Idea Fisher, brainstorming software. But this old guy, 70s and 80s, every morning he would, at 4 o'clock in the morning, he would wake up. He had a printed version of our software, literally huge journals of our software. They're printed out. They were word association software to help you brainstorm. And he would write a joke. And at 7 to 7:30 in the morning, he would call me up and tell me a joke. Like literally, you pick up the phone, it's Marsh, and he would tell me a joke. And that was his thing that he did. That was his stable datum, his cornerstone that he would use to be able to make sure that his brain was still at this operating level he needed it to be at. And so the challenge of writing the joke, the challenge of coming up with something funny, the challenge of, and then having me as his audience was just kind of his thing. When we start building these practices that help us to really catalyze our greatness, our, we call our zone of genius, what we call it around the office, is, what is it, before we hire somebody, we do a number of tests to try to distill their zone of genius. And if that zone of genius is what we need for the company, they're a hire, as long as they fit culturally as well. But to do that, then the next thing is, what are the things you suck at so that we can either get somebody to do those for you or remove those from your plate in one way or another. So that you're always operating at a level above what you would be in a normal environment where you're juggling too many hats. You're doing stuff you're not good at. Strength Finder is one of the tools we use. It's incredible. And then the other is, what are the neurochemical components? Like what are the formulas that we can create for you, that we can optimize for you, that are going to get you to the point where you're always operating at a pretty damn high level. And what can we do then to also increase over time your baseline so that you're always operating at a greater level, always performing better, and you're doing it without straining and killing yourself.
Yeah.
You're doing it as a natural result of just your practices and your breath work and all the other components that are necessary to perform well.
Amazing. Wow. Blowing my mind, Mr. Noots, I should say. Love everything that you said. Any last words of wisdom here before we close things off?
I would highly recommend that aside from come to Nootopia.com, and I think we've got a coupon code for your listeners, is I would take an inventory. We have a free test on the site.
Yep.
You click it and it's going to give you a neurochemical rundown so that you actually know kind of where are you dominant, where are you subdominant, and where do you suck in terms of your neurochemical makeup.
Yeah.
And that way you have an idea and we have an idea of how we can help you improve that and get you to a place of performance.
Amazing. And we'll put all that down in the show notes below for everybody to access as well. Thank you so much for coming on the show today. I really appreciate it. I got a lot and I'm sure our audience did too. All right, guys. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you would like to learn more about how sleep can benefit your personal and business life, visit thesleepconsultant.com. Until next time.
Thanks for listening to the Sleep Experience podcast. We'll see you next time on next week's episode. Be sure to subscribe and follow us to get future updates on everything sleep, energy, focus, stress, and better performance.